Hello, BSC6003 students. Dr. Conway here for Lesson 7. And I want to get us ready now to move through our business cases in the second half of the course. You all have your grades now for your midterms, for your part 1 of your business cases, and for your discussion boards. And now I want to begin to thinking on what's going to happen for part 2 of your business cases, and of course the second half of our course. So today we're going to discuss some of the major steps I want you to begin to think about. I hope all of you have been going through the cost-benefit slide, so the cost-benefit YouTube presentations by the Conservation Society. That's an excellent set of cost-benefit videos. I think there are 13 short videos that give you a really good rundown of cost-benefit analysis. So today I'm not going to go into that level of detail, but I want us to begin to think about why we did part 1 and what's going to happen as we move to part 2 of our business cases. Okay, so let's pick that up now and go from there. All right, so now remember that one of the key issues of any sort of cost-benefit analysis is understanding the scope of the analysis that we're dealing with, right? So we know that the scope has to be practical. So when you go into a business, and if you're going to do a business case on anything for an employer or for any kind of an energy consumption situation, you need to understand what's going on with the organization and what's the scope of the analysis that you're looking at. Are you proposing to change their entire energy system? Are you looking to propose to change certain elements of their energy system? What is the scope that you're talking about? All right, and it's very important to do that. Now, in the last section of part 1, I asked you to begin to notionally think about, well, what would be the scope of the changes you would make to a baseline build for any building that you selected to make that energy system greener. All right, some of you developed that a little bit more fully than others, but nobody developed fully enough to do a full cost-benefit analysis, and that I've entirely expected. All right, but you need to know the scope, all right, of what it is you're proposing to change. And it's also really important to understand that the scope of your changes that you're proposing may can deviate. In other words, you can have a minimalist scope. You're only going to change something very low cost for the business, and you're going to focus in that area. Or a middle of the road change, where you're going to focus on sort of process changes or training of staff or whatever, plus you're going to change the entire lighting of the system. Or you're going to do something even more substantial, all right? So sometimes what I'm expecting is that when you do your business cases in the second half of the term, that we have a clear notion of some investment options that you're exploring in your business case. So you have that baseline build. Now I want you to present your clients with probably 3 different scenarios where they can improve the energy efficiency or the greenness of their building by making certain decisions, okay, that are to be made. Some of them might be very basic decisions. You might have motion sensors for lighting or whatever the case may be. Some of them may be more elaborate. Instead of having the baseline built lighting, you're going to suggest a complete transformation of the lighting system, or from a baseline. Or you're going to change the air conditioning or the boiler system or the heating source for you're going to go geothermal, or you're going to go some other way for heating and cooling exercises or needs. And then thirdly, you might be proposing that this building go completely net zero, go renewables. I mean, there could be different options of going greener, so to speak. And so once you refine your baseline case, which was the whole purpose of part 1, I want you to set out, sort of 3 different scopes of possible changes that could be made to the baseline build to make it a greener building. But are we making it a greener building because we want to be seen as green as Kermit the Frog? No, we're doing it because we have investors that are building a building of some kind, and that we're trying to show them that by changing from a baseline build to a greener option, that benefits will exceed costs. Okay, obviously no investor is going to invest beyond a baseline build if additional costs are not met by benefits that would be greater relative to costs and relative to the baseline, obviously, right? You know, we need to be able to demonstrate that. And what I want you to be able to demonstrate in your business case is, you know, does scope one or option one, the limited one, you know, do its additional costs, are its additional costs exceeded by greater benefits relative to the baseline? Same thing for middle of the road option, and then the full Monty option, option 3. So always in a cost benefit analysis, you're always comparing to a baseline, but you're also comparing to other options. You're giving your client options. If you go this far, this is how much more benefits you can accrue relative to costs. Okay. If you go this far, does it still make sense? Are the benefits still greater relative to costs? And if you go the full Monty, option 3, are the benefits still greater relative to costs? Or is option 3 a bridge too far? Is option 3, the costs are too great and the benefits returned are just simply not adequate to justify the expenditure? All right. So if relative to cost, the baseline incurs returns a 12% benefit, okay? The minimalist option can return you a 13 or 14% benefit. Well, that might justify moving forward. The middle option might be significantly more costly, but it returns you an 18% net benefit, and so on. So these are the types of things that we want to begin to talk about prior to, you know, as we go through the second half of the course. So we need to go back and we need to look at the baseline a little bit more fully. You know, if you got a grade that was not satisfactory to you and to me on the part 1, then you need to refine your baseline in a spreadsheet table, because you know that spreadsheet table is what you're going to be using to compare the baseline with a cost-benefit analysis of your options 1, 2, and 3 of making a greener building. Okay, so you get that part 1 baseline table, okay, of the technological needs of that building and its power consumption characteristics of an off-the-shelf build. Okay, get that table finalized. Well, what is the technology? How much does it cost to buy? How much does it cost to operate it? How much maintenance does it require? What are the frequency of replacement costs? All of those things are essential for your baseline case. All right. Now, when you go on to options, green option 1, green option 2, and green option 3, we'll call them, you're then going to be comparing the benefits and costs and benefits of green option 1 relative to the baseline, and green option 2 relative to the baseline, green option 3 relative to the baseline. Okay, so in some cases, it may be the cost-benefit analysis may say you can go all the way to option 3, green option 3, and still have benefits exceeding costs relative to the baseline. All right, but in some cases that might be a bridge too far, and the numbers simply do not support that level of investment. But maybe levels 1 and 2 can be supported by the numbers, okay, by the business case being generated. But before we get too far down that road, remember that you need that baseline to be more fully developed. So if you did a baseline, you didn't produce a table, you need to produce the table, the spreadsheet table, all right? If you were not clear on the technology choice for various things that a unit would have, then you need to be clear on that. You need to understand what it costs and what it would cost to operate, how frequently it would need to be replaced, and so on. All right, because all of that baseline data is what you're going to be comparing your green options 1, 2, and 3 to. All right. Now, it's important to understand that when we establish green option 1, we're saying that we're not taking the whole scope of what could be improved by that baseline build, but I've decided in green option 1 to look at only, let's say, changing the lighting. All right, now we're going to see if that's justified. Green option 2, we're going to be changing the lighting plus the air conditioning units. All right, and let's see whether that returns a better cost benefit ratio relative to the baseline. And then option 3, whatever scope you choose for option 3, it's option 1, 2 plus 3, and then you take 3 and you say whether that can improve. Each of those is a different scope of activity, right? The first is a relatively minimal scope of activity. It's just changing some process or training staff or putting in motion sensors for lighting or whatever. Option 2, like I say, might be changing the entire lighting system, might be changing the air conditioning system, the boiler system, whatever. Okay, that gets a little bit more expensive, but is that justified? Okay, when I say changing, I mean upgrading relative to the baseline build, right? And then option 3, you might say, you know what, we're not going with whatever that scope is for option 3. Some of you may go all the way to renewables. Some of you may just say, no, we're not going. So it's up to you how you define the scope of green option 1, green option 2, and green option 3. But I want you to do those options, because when you're dealing with a client doesn't want a scenario where they have to say yes or no to one option. Okay? Neither do you as an energy manager want that scenario. You don't want to present them, for example, with just green option 3, right? Let's face it, right? This may be a client or this may be a boss that just isn't sensitive to energy management issues. And if you try to hit them with the full Monty in your business case, and only the full Monty, the full green number 3 in your business case, then you're likely to scare that client away. You're likely to get no activity, all right? Whereas if you present them with a sort of a low threshold option, a middle of the road option, and the full Monty option, or green 1, 2, and 3, then the client can look at that and say, yeah, I can see that even your option 3 would return greater benefits relative to cost, but that's just a bridge too far for me. I can't risk it. I can't afford that kind of an impact on my investment capital or my cash flow. So we're only going to go to option 2, or we're only going to go to but if you don't have an option 1, an option 2, or an option 3 for your client, then you basically, it's like going to a gambling house and putting all of your money down, or going to a stock market and just picking one and putting all of your money into that one stock. Very risky business, all right? So typically what you do is you establish a baseline. You show the client that if they make this incremental improvement over the baseline, their benefits will exceed their costs relative to the baseline. If you go to option 2, you might still be able to generate benefits might exceed costs. And option 3 might still even show that. Although sometimes that's a bridge too far, but sometimes it can show that there's a cost-benefit justification for going all the way to the full Monty for green option 3, all right? But at the end of the day, you want to present your client with these options, because when you're doing a business case, you won't always know everything behind the scenes, the financial limitations of the company, other investments they might be making, and so on. So they might only go for option 1, even though option 2 showed also a benefit, but they might be doing that exclusively on a cost basis, okay, on a cash flow basis. But now you've presented them with an option. Okay, they may say to you, okay, well, you know what? We're going to do option 1 now, and in 5 years' time, we're going to do option 2 and then move on from there. This kind of thing can happen in a business case, all right? But you can't do any of that until you give them a very clear picture of the baseline. And some of you still need to do that, right? The other major question that a lot of students will have, of course, is, what's the timeline? How do we know how long into the future the business case should go on? Well, generally it's a minimum of 10 years for a business case, okay, for a cost-benefit analysis. Even if you're making level 1, green level 1 changes, which are largely process and so on, you want to be able to demonstrate the benefits of that exceeding over at least a 10-year period. Why is that the case? Why? Because typically whenever you're making an investments of this kind, okay, those investments in year 1 will always exceed. Those costs in year 1, year 2, sometimes year 3 and longer will always exceed those benefits, right? Because you're making all the costs in year 1, year 2, or year 3, or over a short period of time at the start of a business case, okay, in the first few years of a business case. But the benefits don't get returned until many years out. So let's say a scenario requires a $100,000 investment. Okay, you make that $100,000 investment in year one, but the benefits returned are only $10,000 for year one, or $15,000 for year one. Then it's going to look like a terrible investment, of course, right? Because you've absorbed all the costs and only partial part of the benefits in year one. But then in year two, there's not a lot of additional costs, but there's still that $15,000 comes in benefits, okay? Then in year three, there may be some basic maintenance costs, some lighting replacement costs or whatever, but those smaller costs, and you get that $15,000 again. In fact, you get more than $15,000 because maybe energy costs have escalated, okay? And so the further out you go, the greater the benefits are. It's like owning a car, right? In the first 5 years you're paying off your car, it's returning you some benefits, but it's also incurring you a lot of costs. When does a car really start to pay its owner, right? When the costs are paid off, but the benefits of transportation are still there, all right? So that's why I never want you to use just simple payback period as your measure of a cost-benefit analysis. Do not do that. That is completely wrong-headed on the way to think about it. Simple payback period is important for cash flow, okay? It's not important for making decisions about investments, okay? Because the benefits of investments extend over years. The costs of those investments may be incurred just in the first few years, all right? It's like owning a car, all right? So typically the way we look at cost-benefit analysis is most cost-benefit analysis, even if there are not a lot of technological investments involved, should look at a scenario over 10 years. When you're doing something as significant as major capital investments to acquire boiler systems, air conditioning systems, renewable energy plants, solar panels, anything like that, you have to extrapolate the business case over the expected life of that technology. All right, so if I'm making an investment in a new building and I'm putting in a boiler system for that building, the life expectancy of that boiler system may be 20 years. So my business case at least needs to look over a time horizon of 20 years because, you know, the boiler system is an expensive piece of machinery. If I only take my business case to 10 years, it may look like the cost-benefit ratio of that investment makes no sense because the costs and benefits are basically equal. Well, why would that be the case? Well, because the technology, the equipment is still there and it's still returning benefits. So if you look at that second 10-year increment out to 20 years, you're going to see that the purchasing of the more efficient boiler system returned greater net present value than not making that investment. All right? So it's important for students to understand that simple payback period from a business person's perspective is important for cash flow. All right? For example, if I'm in a business and I'm going to agree to allow you to purchase me a new boiler system, I'm not laying cash on that. I need my cash for my operating costs to pay my workers and so on. All right? So I'm going to go borrow the money for that, but I have to pay the bank back. Okay? So I'm interested in when that's paid off because I can stop making those cash flow payments to the bank and then I can make other types of investments. So on an operating cash flow basis, simple payback period is important, but it still doesn't tell me anything about the utility or the cost-benefit viability of making the investment in the first place. Because once I pay back that boiler system, actually, that's when I'm really starting to incur the benefits of the new boiler system, right? Because I paid the boiler system off in 5 years, but that thing's got 15 years more life in it, and it's returning me benefits relative to the baseline for those remaining 15 years, all right? So those the $15,000 chunks just keep accumulating, actually higher because energy costs are going up during that period too. So maybe 15 by year 6, maybe 15,000 to 16,000. By year 10, maybe it's 18,000 by year. And so, you know, all of those are accumulating for each individual year when the boiler system isn't costing me much anymore, right? Maintenance, odd part repair, something like that. But overall, the thing that's when the thing is returning me my benefits, all right? So you have to have a time horizon looking out. Worst mistake that any young energy manager can make is by falling into the trap of talking about simple payback period. All right. Simple payback period needs to be in there, but it's in there for operational cash flow reasons only. It's not in there to justify an investment. An investment needs to be justified by the life expectancy of the technology, the major purchasing that you're making, and showing how over the life expectancy of that technology, benefits will exceed costs. All right? And it's very important for you to understand that, because a lot of the times I have to reprogram energy management students to realize that there is a role for simple payback period, but it is not a business case role. It's an operational cash flow role to be played. All right? Okay? For example, like I say, you buy a car, it's costing you $800 a month to pay off that car. All right? So in that 5-year, that 60-month period where you're paying off that car, you don't have that $800 to invest in something else. Let's say your partner and you are thinking of buying a house, okay? But you need that $800 to buy a house. Well, when that car is paid off, it tells you when you can afford the house, okay? But it doesn't say anything about the utility of that car, all right? The car is still in existence. In fact, you just buying a new house, you're going to probably want to make that car last, right? And that's when that car actually begins to pay you benefits, because the car's paid off now, but you're still getting the benefits of transportation for you, your wife, and your children, or your partner, and whatever, over a 15 or 20 year period. Okay, so realistically, a car, typically 10 years. All right, would typically what we would do for a car. But you get the point. All right, that we need to be very clear on the time horizon of a project. And what I'm saying is even if you're only recommending process changes, no major technological or capital acquisitions, 10 years. If you're making major technological acquisitions, then it should be over a reasonable life your business case should extend over a reasonable life expectancy of the most significant technological or capital expenditure that you're making for that business case. So if in scenario one you're only proposing some process changes and maybe some motion sensors, whatever the case may be, or vestibule to prevent heat from escaping or whatever, then maybe we only look at that over a 10-year period. But if in green option 2 you're saying no, we're going to compare relative to the baseline, we're buying a super high efficiency, expensive super high efficiency systems, okay? Then how long do those last? The client says. Well, typically, we find that the industry standard is they last about 25 years, 20 to 25 years, with certain maintenance costs which have to be factored in and so on. But so our business case is going to extend out over that period, because initially that expensive piece of equipment is going to the cash flow is going to look terrible the first few years, right? Your costs are going to greatly exceed your benefits, right? Because you've just put an extra $400,000 into this equipment, and relative to the baseline, the benefits are only an additional $20,000 per annum. Ooh, yikes! All right, but when you extend that technology well beyond its simple payback period into the future of its typical life expectancy, the benefits accumulate, and when they're brought back to the baseline year with a net present value, it shows that the investment is worth making. All right. So you need to be very clear when you lay out your plans on what your investment plans are. So it's green option 1, it may be relatively simple. Green option 2, what specifically are you looking at? Green option 3, what specifically are you looking at? That needs to be very specific. And the reason that needs to be very specific is because the numbers need to be compared with the baseline scenario. And the baseline scenario needs to be specific as well. All right? So, for example, if you are doing a condo building, all right, and you identified in your baseline that each of these condo units would require, fans, a heating system, hot water heating, lighting, a fridge, a stove, maybe a dishwasher, all of these kinds of things, and you're going to buy the basic ones for all of these units, right? It's basic. That's it. Times how many units there are. All right. So, times how many of the units there are, plus some increment for larger units and so on. Okay. So you lay that out as your baseline. Okay. Your off-the-shelf build. But now you're going to say, well, there are some greener options, and you've been tasked with looking at those greener options. Well, what's your low threshold one? Well, maybe you're going to move to simply better lighting in these units, okay? Or you're going to move to something, another increment higher than that. Then in your middle option, actually, you're going to move, to a much more higher efficient process for air conditioning, for water heating, for heating, and so on. You've got some idea that you've come out with, or you're going to go with the full Monty. This is going to be a net zero building, okay? Net zero building, which means that it's going to have renewables integrated into it, and so on and so forth. And you need to be very clear about the scope of each of those scenarios and what investments would be needed to realize those scenarios. Green option 1, green option 2, green option 3 needs to be very specific, because you're comparing it with very specific things in the baseline, okay? And you're not doing, in each of your green option 1, green option 2, green option 3, you're taking an aspect of that baseline, okay, and changing it for green option 1, green option 2, green option 3. Or maybe your green option 3 is so ambitious that it's completely transforming the energy profile of the entire building. That's up to you. But whatever you do in the scope, the investments planned and needed need to be compared with the baseline, so they need to be equally precise as the baseline. Okay? And then something else that's going to be in your business case is your assumptions, right? All business cases, because they are predictive, right? All business cases are predictive, right? You're doing an analysis of a cost-benefit analysis in a business case that says that if we make this investment, based on all of our expertise, all of previous historical experience and so on, this should happen over the next 20 years. But because all business cases are by their very nature predictive, okay, they are going to contain assumptions, okay? And those assumptions have to be factored into your cash flow scenario out over the scope and the duration of your business case, okay? One of those assumptions would be energy costs. Energy costs are likely to escalate over this time period, right? Right. Okay. Maintenance costs. Maintenance costs. The industry experience with this product indicates this kind of a maintenance cycle at this kind of a cost. It's like buying a car again, right? You know that for the first few years it's covered under warranty, but what are likely to be the costs after it's no longer under warranty? Those have to be anticipated, okay? Otherwise, you have a car that doesn't run because you can't afford to maintain it. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So you need to have a lot of these assumptions need to be built into your cash flow scenario going out, the duration of the time horizon of your project. What is cash flow? Cash flow is, right, costs, right, minus returns, right, per annum. So, okay, so costing me this much to run this year. This is the benefits or returns that I accrued. So what's the net? Is it positive or negative? When you make an initial capital investment for a business case, your first few years are going to look negative, right? They're going to be red because you made all the investments now. You've only accrued the first or 2 or 3 year annual benefits, which will not exceed the costs in the first few years. It's when you go out over the duration of the project that the benefits will exceed the costs. So you have to think about assumptions. Assumptions like, what is going to be my energy cost escalator that I'm going to use in my business case? What is my maintenance cost cycle that I'm going to incur in my business case table, okay? What are my replacement costs for things like lighting? How often will they have to be replaced? That's going to go into my business case. All right. All of those assumptions have to be thought through. Okay. And then later on, we'll be talking about summative statistics, and I'll talk more about cash flow and that kind of stuff later. But initially, I want you to start to think about these key things, making sure that your baseline is in an Excel spreadsheet with all of the things that I indicated for part 1. Okay. Begin to think about whether there's a low-hanging fruit option for making it a greener building that you're going to investigate. There's a middle-of-the-road option for making it a greener building that you're going to investigate. Then there's going to be the full Monty option that you're going to investigate. You're just investigating it at this point. You're doing a cost benefit, you're doing analysis of each of these options, and you're comparing them to the baseline. You're going to include them in your business case, but you might include them in your business case by simply just disregarding option 3, because you're going to tell your client, as you can see in Annex C, we did a more thorough conceptualization of the green building, but we did determine that at this point, because of the state of the technology or whatever the case may be, costs will exceed benefits, and we disregarded that. We discarded that as a viable investment option for you, sir or ma'am. Okay? Now for option 1 and option 2, you can see the analysis, blah, 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 blah. All right? And typically when we're done this analysis, we come up with basic statistics like cost-benefit ratio, net present value, and IRR. Yes, simple payback period is in there, but not for cost benefit. Simple payback period might be in the table with an asterisk saying this is when it would be paid off, because the client might say that's important for my cash flow management, but it's not an investment decision. All right? Investment decision is made on some statistics over the appropriate duration of the technology, not simple payback period. All right? Okay, so that's clear. So on that, we'll keep going. We'll have our call tomorrow, and we can pick up any issues related to this in that call. Okay? Have a good week, gang. Welcome back from the break, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.